Hello, my friends. Happy Thursday. I am excited to have this conversation with you today. We're going to talk about system architecture, and that's something that is misunderstood and often done wrong. Before we really get into the nuts and bolts, we're going to talk about kind of the logistics of the live today. I just want to give you a quick format. As always, I have an outline and we'll go through kind of my thoughts around this topic. But this is really your time to ask questions. So definitely feel free to put your questions in the chat and we can go through anything that you want to talk about. Typically, these evolve into questions around systems. I just want to remind everyone that I am an enterprise specialist, so most of my experience and expertise is going to be around larger businesses. But definitely let me know where you're joining from. I love our little corner of the internet here, which is always a fun way to kind of share this knowledge. My goal with these conversations is just to give you access to things that are so gatekept by big technology or big software because they want to, charge you for that knowledge and really profit off of your confusion. And system architecture is still one of those things that's very confusing, especially with all of, the SaaS mafia trying to lock you into certain systems that service, your entire enterprise. So we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of see where we go from there. But as always, it doesn't really matter what I say, right? I have one experience and you guys have another. So definitely share your thoughts on it. Joining from Canada. Welcome. Excited to have you here. Where in Canada? It's a very big country. Love to know. So maybe I could practice my French. I'm just kidding. I don't know any French, but I was from Melbourne. Good. Good to know. Nova Scotia. Oh, cool. Someplace I've never been, but it's absolutely on my bucket list. You probably know maybe a little French up there. I won't even, embarrass myself by trying. I was recently at a conference in Toronto and realized that Canadians and Americans do youth sports very differently. Like we were talking about like, oh, my son is this football game, my son is this football game. And they're like, dude, what are you talking about? Like that's a whole ton of stuff that you do. And all of my Quebecois colleagues were like, what are you talking about, lady? But anywho, I'm glad you guys are here. It's going to be a fun conversation. And so let's get into it. I think I saw questions coming in already. But I think before we get into those, I'm going to define solution architecture and system architecture. They can be used interchangeably, but really the system architecture is going to be in charge of whatever system or solution you are working with. A lot of times we can have what's called enterprise architecture, which would be more of a larger architecture, but that can be used interchangeably with solution architecture. It's really how do all of your systems fit together within your processes and kind of what is the foundation of that house that you're working on. So it's how systems talk together, not so much the system or tools that you that you bought. It's not always snark time here, but you know what I'm a sucker for in these conversations. We're talking about kind of decision-making structure when it comes to these systems. Who owns that? And who's in charge of making sure that the system is proficient in those conversations? So the way that I always describe it when we talk about like new solutions and automation, AI, is if your solution architecture is chaotic, then your chaos is going to be automated faster. And I'm actually going to give you, I have a little like company A versus company B example that I'm going to give you about solution architecture so you can kind of see that. I feel like that's the easiest way to explain it without someone trying to be like, yeah, I'll evaluate your solution architecture. So let's see. Where's my company A versus company B? So for company A, right, we've got a mid-sized manufacturer that's very, very high growth, right? So they have ERP for financial and operational. They have an MES, which is a manufacturing execution system. If you ever don't understand the acronyms I say, just tell me that, right? They've got a PLM to define their product definitions, a CRM for customers, and then one line of integration layer that connects everything. Clear data ownership and governance. You own this data, you're responsible for that. And so what does that look like day to day? It means new products often launch faster, right? Rework is much less, so we have higher quality, less waste, right? Which equals money. And that's a big piece of this, of how a lot of people are like, how do you quantify solution architecture? Well, if your solution architecture should directly tie to profitability of the business, right? Then you have planning that's able to adjust quickly. So if there's something that's going on in the marketplace, say you lost a certain supplier, or there's a winter storm going across the US and you can't get raw product, you can adjust because you've got that foundational piece in place. You have fewer operators, which is just honest. That doesn't mean that you need to reduce your headcount. Everyone kind of freaks out when I say that. But that means that we have less people babysitting systems. And then we have leadership that has one source of truth. So that means that there's one single revenue number that we're looking at, whether that be finance, marketing, production, whatever else. So we have one single source of truth. And so that kind of ties everything together. So bad architecture would be company B that has an ERP that might be homegrown or kind of built together with customizations. And I see this a lot with my SAP friends, right? Customizations, so we've bend it till it broke. We got a Frankenstein system in there. Spreadsheets to bridge gaps, right? We're not all using the same system because we can't, and we need to create workarounds. Integrations that were built by vendors that have either like completely ghosted you or just gone, so you don't even really know what they mean. And then we don't know which system is right. And that's a big thing. So planning is super reactive, right? When we have that winter storm that's going across the United States, we can't just switch suppliers because our procurement database isn't effective in doing that, and we don't know what it's going to cost. My company is company B. Most are. So I would just like to say, like, most are, but there are little things that you can do in this conversation to ensure that you're moving towards that, right? Nothing is going to be perfect in this conversation. Fire drills, the hysteria, right? Everyone's stressed all the time, feels very normal. You go around saying like, oh, it's another fire drill. You know, IT is on call reactively because things are broken. They don't have any room to proactively plan how the company can be better, right? And then changes take weeks. So if we have a supplier that is out of commission, it takes us weeks of lost revenue because we can't fulfill demand, right? IT is always blamed for the business problems. And then headcount grows just to manage friction. And we have all of these duplicating resources. So it's not only unhealthy for the business, but unhealthy for the people, right? So that's kind of the importance of system architecture. It really is the glue that holds everything together. A lot of people see it as just a technical discipline, and it's certainly not. I feel called out. All right, let's get to your questions. I just wanted to give you guys a baseline of like what we're looking at here. For that question, what separates good architecture and bad architecture? I would say in both of these, there needed to be a very strong leadership and relationship between the business. So the CIO and the COO are good friends, right? They're working together. They're making sure that their teams aren't duplicating this. A lot of people think solution architecture should live with the business. I would agree, as long as it has a very red line to IT. So that IT has to be a part of this. If you leave them out, you might as well just go throw your money off a roof. Is good solution architecture a competitive advantage, or is it a mean to capitalize on businesses' competitive advantage? I would say a solution architecture is absolutely a competitive advantage because in A versus B, right, I have a high demand for my snow shovels. I could not sell in company B my snow shovels because I could not get the plastic that I needed to melt the bucket to the snow shovel, right? I knew snow shovels were in high demand. I can't fulfill that demand. So now my Amazon sales are much less than my competition because they were able to get another supplier in that time and make that change. I was brought in as our CRM platform product owner. Yeah, the CRMs are one of the hardest systems because you have to work with the salespeople. And they're not about the systems, which is, everyone has their role, right? But CRMs are very, very difficult. I would be curious to know what CRM you were using. If it was Salesforce, I'm going to say I'm sorry right now. No, Salesforce is an okay system as long as you didn't pay someone to customize it. Again, bend it till it broke. Should every department have their own system? Absolutely not. No. The less systems, the better. I would say we need to take that with a grain of salt of what's best for our organization. But the less systems we have pulling and manipulating data, the less discrepancies we have, right? Why is system A reporting that Q4 revenue was 4 million and system B says it was 2 million? Obviously, that's a huge problem. My salespeople are very picky. I love and hate it. I mean, salespeople and systems are one of the hardest things. I mean, not all of them. I would prefer to use Salesforce. I know that system very well. Are you in like a HubSpot or a homegrown one? Sometimes I think it's designed to not work. Salesforce is absolutely designed to not work. I would just say in certain situations, these gated systems, Salesforce, but HubSpot is a great example of this, of like, it's actually designed not to work so that it could show you how you need to get to the next level of license. So absolutely, especially over complex customized solutions. Then you have a bunch of like an army of Salesforce consultants that you can't fire because you don't know how they built that integration. This is why solution architecture, system architecture should be an internal to the organization. Can you hire someone to come help you set that up? Because you're like, I don't know how to do this. Absolutely, right? Do that, right? But make sure they're not trying to sell you like, oh, I can get you, an interoperability system that's going to solve all your problems. That's how Snowflake and Palantir like bust onto the marketplace. And now people are like, do those actually work? I mean, they work if you have it set up to work, but you might as well, make your own system. Let's see. At that point. Thank you. As the business becomes more customized, I appreciate that you are using the European English spelling. I see you. Is there a solution? All add-ons, all the add-ons and maintaining the tech depth? Like, so do you mean, is there like an interoperability solution for that? Is that what you mean? Hi, thanks for your videos. Is there any attention point due to the migration from ECC to S4HANA? So we have a lot of videos on ECC to S4HANA. I think when you're moving from an ECC architecture to S4HANA, it's actually a little bit easier when it comes to solution architecture because you have that one enterprise system. The thing I will say about that is that you need to understand that S4HANA was developed in the cloud, right? Its point is getting you all of your system architecture on SAP solutions, which is what RISE does, right? So how do you decide which systems should pass data to each other? So that's where that solution mapping comes in. We need to make sure that we understand where the data goes and how it goes there. And that's the data layer, which makes sense to talk about the different layers of architecture. So we have 5 typically that we look at. And so we have got the business layer, like what actually needs to happen. And a lot of times this is how we stop businesses from going straight to the solution. What problems do we have? Where's the value created? Why do we need the system? And then the next layer to that is really the process layer. Like, how do these all go together? A lot of times they don't want to talk about where handoffs break or all of these different things because it's painful, right? Of course, like we want to be able to get that understanding of how we can make things better, but we can only do that if we know where we started. And then we have the data layer. So what is the single source of truth, right? And who owns the data, right? Where are the data owners, the data stewards, and do we have a big data cleanup to do? If we do, it's fine. Everybody relax. But we've got a plan for when that cleanup is over. Who's going to ensure that you that you have that master data management around that? And then what if the data breaks? Where do we go? Where does it go wrong? How do we map that? We certainly can't do that without understanding the mapping. And then typically after that, we have the application layer where we're looking at things like ERP, MES, warehouse management systems, CRMs, PLMs, all of those different systems. And then lastly, we have the integration layer, right? So how do they talk to each other? Do you have middleware in there, right? Like, are they custom integrations? Do you have some sort of APIs? What do you got going on there? Not anything is bad, right? We just have to make sure that it's healthy and that things are being passed back and forth. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Sorry, the questions like go away from me, and the mapping can be the worst. It's painful. As I always say, it's not going to be fun, right? Not getting in shape to run a marathon. Nobody the entire time is like, yes, I get to run 16 miles. Not that I've ever run 16 miles in my life. I assume it's painful, right? So you have to have the discipline to know that we're doing this for a reason, right? We're getting ready for race day type of thing. And the mapping does present issues. And a lot of times that can be a big part of it. Like, why is this happening? Or what does that really look like? SAP install in 2003 of every module, sales migrated, 1 million customer discounts, which broke the server. Oh, cool. That sounds awesome. No, it doesn't. I think I would be interested to see, like, what did you install in 2003? And a lot of times when sales leads the migration, like, that's obviously an issue. Were you migrating it over to the cloud? Like, was it a lift and shift, or what happened in that situation? That's going to be a good one. Know the difference between difficult and incorrect. Yes, in it for the long run. How do you know the difference between difficult and incorrect? I mean, I think you guys, being, the smart professionals that you are, can understand that if you don't know how to map your data, it's not that big a deal, right? You can absolutely move out of that if you have the ability to work together as a team. And that's going to be really the biggest piece of this. Do you have Stu that wrote all the custom code for your homegrown ERP system, and you're looking at a new one, and he retires in a year, so he's not really interested in sharing what, his tribal knowledge? Is that a big piece of this? And should you be looking at that? Let's see, what else do we got here? What's your take on SAP CPQ, or should we move out of SAP? Well, what are you trying to do with CPQ? I think it's more of a decision engine, right? It's not an ERP or anything like that, right? So what it does is it translates kind of the order into the intent. So being built for pricing and all of those different things are a big part of CPQ. And so I would say, if you have bad orders, right? Shout out to Drew and Stu from IT. Yeah, there's lots of them. It can become an expensive problem, but it's not a bad system. I mean, SAP is not a bad system. It's the right fit for a variety of different systems. Or it's for different businesses. Sorry, speaking of fire drill, I've got messages like popping in my face. I need to just put it on Do Not Disturb. And that's a big piece of why SAP gets a bad rap, because these are the biggest businesses in the world, right? These are the most public, expensive failures. Do other implementation or do other softwares fail? For sure. But I think it depends on your configuration logic. those commercial rules, like a variety of other things it's going to look at. So I think it can be a great fit for the right organization, as long as, it's not in charge of things like financials or something. That's where you kind of get in trouble with it. Let's see, what else do we got here in our outline for our solution architecture? So a few like myths that I want you guys to remember when it comes to solution architecture. A lot of times when we look at cloud in particular, a lot of people can think that cloud means that you're more flexible or that your architecture automatically gets easier. And that's not true whatsoever. Like I was mentioning in that ECC to S4HANA example, like, did you just drop all of your data into S4HANA or did you actually go through the discipline of cleansing it and making sure that it works? That's a big thing. I would also say, like, the more strings that you have in your architecture, the more fragile it is. Is that a bad thing? No, but it's something that you definitely need to know about, right? When you go into these types of things, especially if the average SAP client has more than 300 integrations. Does that mean that's terrible? No, absolutely not. It means that you need to be able to understand what that looks like from that perspective. And then I would say another one is we can fix it in phase 2, right? A lot of times we want to push, especially the harder problems, when we're going through an architecture revamp or redesign. We want to be able to push things to phase 2 so that they don't have to be dealt with right now. And kind of phase 2, I always say, is where things go to die. Unless, let's see. Oh, Cadbury. I bet that was a wild ride. We'll talk about that in a second. And then I would say the last thing I would say is when we have an interoperability tool that manages our solution architecture, it's just as hard to manage for the employees that are in charge of that. A lot of people think that you can just plug that in and it's going to make all of these amazing dashboards, and it will, right? Like it will. If you add Snowflake or Palantir over in your layer, then absolutely you can do that, Boomi, all of these different things. But that doesn't always mean that more dashboards equals better and healthier business. You need to know how the engine works under the hood. You can't just, take it to the mechanic every now and then, or it's not really your car, right? So let's see. 2003 install was Cadbury, the first country of global rollout. We failed, we learned, worked somewhere else. That's a really interesting one. Is that S4HANA that you're talking about? Let's see. How do you make sure you aren't buying a system as a Band-Aid solution? Well, what is the issue, right? So for a Band-Aid solution, like sometimes Boomi or any sort of layer of middleware can seem like that's the Band-Aid solution. But we have to know where the critical issues are and how are they prioritized in that piece. That's going to be the understanding of like how you don't create Band-Aid solutions is like, what is the actual problem? What are we trying to make better? And will this solution or system make it better? If that answer is like kind of, okay, like what is the long-term plan for that? What's our 5-year plan look like? And I will say that that's a good way, sorry, I'm choking over here, to talk about the red flags around that. So how do you know? AS400. Okay, cool. That's awesome. That's really cool. We have lots to learn from you for sure. That's great experience. What courses do you recommend for automation cases? I think that when it comes to automation cases, using those system specifics, so ServiceNow has, learning modules that you can potentially get certified in. A lot of people, use those certifications. So on the solution architecture side, definitely those are great internal pieces to go through. So whether it's ServiceNow or SAP or anything like that, I would stick to system specific in those so that you know how the automation actually works. When it comes to, I would say, when you're interviewing an SI and they bring a bunch of certs to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that that solution architect that's going to handle your implementation is a good fit, right? That's the only thing I will say about that. Love what I'm seeing, this type of content, good. People really underestimate how complicated an ERP rollout. Oh yeah, absolutely. And not many people have done them, right? Some have in the workforce, but when you have a specific system, especially one that's larger, Oracle, S4HANA, anything like that, you really absolutely need that specialized person in-house. So going back to some red flags, like what are some red flags that you have to relook at, even smaller ones? Absolutely. And for Epicor, we always prefer that someone has experience at least with IFS when we utilize that, especially if you want an effective solution architecture, because that's just one piece of that. Oh, procurement, that's great. I want to specialize in automation. I think procurement automation is actually one of the coolest areas. I would say, I don't really know. If you DM me, I will ask. I'm not a procurement specialist, so that one I would have to take back and probably ask some of my colleagues. But if you send me a DM, I'll definitely get you some. I know someone after our last live DM'd me about some certs, so I'll certainly look at that as well. But I mean, ServiceNow is not a bad place to start. So red flags. Okay, so manual reentry of data is always a big one, right? Where are we having to reenter data that isn't passing or doesn't even have a workflow to pass? No single owners of data are something that I see all the time. Like, who is responsible for this data? Who is responsible for making sure that the data is clean that goes into the system, right? We need data owners. So you're in charge of the CRM data, and we need data stewards, right? A vendor's bid says their team experience is greater than 150 years. 2 months later, it's one grad in 6 months. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the experience with the system and the vendors, a lot of times, like, you know, for example, we have a client that they're very specialized. We're in heavy industry, right? We're in mining, metals, things like that. So this is for a mining client. And the system integrator that's pitching them was like, yeah, you know, we have mining experience. Like, this is our guy, blah, blah, blah. And immediately we could start to see, like, they didn't really know each other that well, right? You can, if you've been through a lot of these, you can see the writing on the wall, right? And that piece of it is really looking at, have you been with this team? How long have you been with this team? And eventually, you know, we found out he's never done a project. He's a contractor. And a lot of times that's what will happen in these conversations is they'll bring in someone to kind of win the foot in the door deal and then start to pull in those new grads that, you know, bill you for breathing because they don't bring a ton of experience to the table. There's nothing wrong with new graduates, right? There's nothing wrong with having junior employees on the project. Just make sure we're transparent about what the company's paying for, right? I don't go to the grocery store and not be allowed to look in my bag of groceries that I just paid for. That's crazy. So we certainly aren't going to do that. And we don't outsource our solution architecture to someone else, right? So that's a big red flag. If you're thinking like, oh, I'm just going to have someone come in here and set this up for me and then not worried of that, we will have none of that. Exactly. We will say less. Did I use it right? So I think architecture decisions during the sales cycle is another big one, right? So if we're buying a new product and we're thinking about, we're going to have to redo our entire system architecture to accommodate this new product. Okay, well, again, that is fine, but just know that we need to talk about that first. It's not something that we need to look at in the sales cycle to accommodate a new system. We, right, need to decide what's going to make sense for our business, not somebody else's business, right? And that is a big piece of that conversation when it looks at where these decisions are made. Ideally, like we would have already had an outline and a map of our system architecture and the spot that we're looking to fill before we go talk to a vendor. You can certainly talk to an outside consultant or something like that that's going to come in. Maybe they know your industry, maybe they know a certain system, maybe they're your automation specialist, and that you want to see where in your architecture you could, fit healthy automation. And that's a consideration when looking at those different tools, but those decisions should really be held before we start on the sales process. So we don't want to make those in the sales process. So I can see you guys sending like volcanoes and things. I don't know what that means, but I'm very grateful for your volcano, right? Volcano is kind of like an ERP project. Like it gets bigger, and then it just erupts, especially if you're running SAP. I'm just kidding. So I think the biggest piece I would say, and I would be interested what you guys think about it, is if the system went down for a day, who would fix it? Like who would fix it, and then who would panic first, right? Where would be the first area of the business that would freak out, right? Would it be production? Would it be, finance? Like what would it be? And then how many people touch the same data point before it actually goes into the system? So if we're looking at like a CRM example, like we were talking about, does somebody get the customer contact? Does someone then talk to the customer, and then the customer's data goes into the system, and then someone edits that data? Like what does that really look like? Or where is the purchasing of the product? Does the customer have to purchase the product first and then it goes into the CRM? What does that look like? And are there any spreadsheets involved? Are there certain systems that don't play well together? Absolutely, right? Integration is the name of the game, but the goal of a vendor is to make as much money off of your business systems as they can, right? No doubt about it. So they're going to try and ensure that you need to use their CRM, their ERP, their warehouse management system, and all of those different aspects of it you need to consider. Maybe all of their systems are the best choice for you. I would say probably not, because that would be pretty specific to a certain vendor. But you have to know that that's their agenda. Does that make them terrible people? No, it means they have a job to do and they have quotas to meet, and that's what their profitability is built off of. I will say, like, it will be interesting to see like the legislation that we have in the next years when it comes to not monopolizing customer data. And we're seeing that play out kind of in real time with the SAP versus Celonis lawsuit that I talk about all the time. And it's interesting because Celonis was born out of SAP's incubation program, but SAP acquired Signavio and many different things happened. And now they will block your data from working with Signavio. And Signavio says, hey, you can't do that. And we'll see kind of how that continues to play out. So, but I would definitely say that when we're looking at bigger enterprise systems, there's a lot of times when it's like, yeah, that can integrate with everything. Or integration agnostic is a big word people like to use nowadays. But I want to see that integration. If it's a critical system to me, I want to see how it works and see how you built it, not me, and that I manage it. And it doesn't need to be a custom integration. Because, we can API anything, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to work well, right? So how do you verify an integration will actually be functional? You make them show you. It should be something that's within your demo process that you go through. So let's see. Are there any systems? Sorry. They moved TikTok needs some work on their system architecture. Are there any systems you should never try and integrate? I mean, at an enterprise level, right? You would want to know your cybersecurity risks. If you're integrating your financial information with anybody or anything, you're going to really need to understand what is the layer of my cybersecurity here. So that, that's one piece of that, your data. Where is it housed? Where is it stored? I would say any systems you should never try and integrate. I wouldn't say never, but unless you have a sophisticated cybersecurity plan, you need to know how that critical data is going to be kept safe, especially for compliance and traceability and all of those different things. Let's see, your data, heavy on the your data, right? As an IT guy with 25 years of experience, I'm living for your video. So thank you. That's so great. I'm so glad you're here. Nacho Libre. Let's see. EFI, electronics imaging, is definitely a monopoly for the printing industry. I know nothing about that, so that sounds really interesting. I've heard a lot about the printing industry lately, or just like printer software, which, I would deeply like to stay away from. But a lot of like what those like office supplies printer softwares have been just moving to things that I've never even considered for them, which would be like Odoo, like an open source system. But I'd love to hear more about that. And I think that will be a big case, especially if you're industry specific, of like, how do you ensure that you're still able to utilize things? So let's see. How do governments do procurement and project management for big system upgrades? What are your credentials? I don't have any credentials, sorry. How do governments do procurement and PM better for these big system upgrades? I would say if they're going from a legacy system to a newer system, then they need to understand that very well in the demo process. So those demos should be very focused on procurement specifically, if that's, an area of pain point for them. When it comes to project management, I think for public sector, and I want to say I'm not a public sector expert in any way, shape, or form, speaking of credentials, but a lot of times what they do is completely outsource their project management. And that to me is very dangerous, not to mention it's not good use of taxpayer funds if you are in a government like that. When it comes to big system upgrades, you need to understand how that affects your employees internally. I think, just yesterday I posted that video about Queensland Health in Australia. And already I've been so struck by the people that have reached out to me about, the payments when it comes to nursing staff and all of that were truly affected. Like, people's lives were affected by that. It can seem like something that we don't really talk about, but when it comes to governments, emergency service, rescue management systems, all of those different pieces, it's a huge risk, right? There's people's lives on the line, and that might sound dramatic, but the public sector needs to take that seriously and doesn't need to outsource that to bigger agencies. I'm talking mostly to you, the UK, and the US too, And that's really what they need to focus on, is that internal project management, or they need specialists that come in that only do public sector, that really understand the risks involved in that. I would also say they need to be transparent with their constituents, right? When you're going through these, we only see them in public record when they're going to get real bad, right? Like the IBM, the Birmingham City Council, the, US Air Force failures. Those happen because they're public entities and they're part of public record. But imagine all of the things that happened for those 10 years that we didn't hear about them. We should have been hearing about them, in my opinion. Let's see. I'd love to hear what you guys think, though, on that level as well. I think internal project management competencies is a huge piece of really understanding that. Also understanding what you're buying, right? And knowing that you don't always have to do Tyler Technologies or something like that. You can absolutely utilize different software for different things in the public sector, just as the private sector does. My dad sold printing software for like 40 years. He hated it. I mean, your dad and I have that in common. Move away from waterfall to agile, and forget about 99 years identification. Yeah, I mean, the movement, we move a lot of IT teams over to an agile process. And it's certainly, I would say a process in which that is more future oriented and flexible. But before everyone loses their mind, a lot of people call them mini waterfalls and things like that. So there's agile, vibes around that process. Those processes is all about how do you ensure that you can make that decision fast but cautious. So trying to have cybersecurity in the Internet of Things sounds like hell. Well, it is for some people. That's why a lot of people move back to like on-premise and just localized agents, right? Same in, yeah, I do lives every Tuesday and Thursday, so come back. Same with Phoenix. Is it called Phoenix in Canada? But, the payroll system, yes. But the vendor wasn't completely at fault on that one. No, it's not. It sounds like IBM was at fault on that one. I think IBM should be banned from doing all payroll work. Obviously, that isn't something that they're able to do. They've proved that on many indemnification. Identification is fine too. Whatever, Nacho. We're here for it. So, started following you today. Wow, you're such a refreshing to hear. Love you too. Absolutely. No, I think this corner of the internet is super fun because we're able to have these conversations without any pressure, right? I have no idea if you need SAP or Infor or all of these different pieces. I don't know what your solution architecture means, but that you should have the right to ask those questions, right? Without someone immediately being like, well, I can get in there and look at it for you and all of the, and by the way, I get, kickbacks from SAP. So I'm going to sell you that. And I'm going to sell you consulting services that I don't actually know how to do and all those different things. So that's really just my goal here is to be able to give that platform to ask those questions. Peace and love always. So I think I would love to and let's see. I would love to talk about healthy integration models versus unhealthy integration models, right? Those are big pieces because integrations, again, are one of those misunderstood things. And vendors love to talk about, I wonder what Accenture and Deloitte use for payroll. That's a great question, right? If you pre-select the vendor and system and don't put safeguards around the RFP, you get what you deserve. I think so too. The RFP process is a difficult one as well. And the RFPs are so misused too by vendors. Like maybe you'll get this like really, really low quotes, right? To get their foot in the door. And then all of a sudden you got a $5 million bid and it's actually going to be a $50 million bid. Now that we got in and looked around, right? All of those different things. So what SaaS systems do you use? I'm an enterprise SaaS solution specialist. It's usually heavy industry in which my firm does. So that would mean mining, metals, complex manufacturing. So we use a variety of different systems. If you want to know about any systems, you just let me know which ones and I'll talk about them. But when it comes to integrations, vendors love to sell those like they're, you plug in your microwave and they all of a sudden work. And that is not at all how integrations are managed. That's where we get in trouble because we might buy a system that seems really cool, that looks really good, and we think it integrates with our system, but we actually need some middleware or some APIs or more technical things than we had the competencies in-house to utilize. So, my two examples, just like I did company A versus company B. So a healthy integration model would use things like clear system of record and like those data domains that we kind of talked about, that ownership system. They would have documented API and middleware, not just something that they slapped on there. And the selection process for that middleware should be just as grueling as anything else that you utilize. They should be owned internally. And I think change management, not something I talk about a lot because, again, I think it's a misunderstood discipline, but that's what most people call it. So just an understanding of like what is changing and where is a big piece. And then integrations, that are templatized, I would say. So they're designed once, tested, and they're reused often, so that we don't have all of these different approaches. We kind of talked about agile. Sometimes when we are testing integration, an agile opportunity is great because we're able to prove the value of that integration on a smaller, less risk project. And that way we can fail faster, as I always say. So you can learn from that when it's not at a massive level, and we can fix that before it gets, into a larger, more enterprise level system. So vendors build, right, these integrations, and then owners own. It's not a custom integration. I can't tell you that enough, right? We've had clients come to us and be like, hey, I don't know whether we need a new system. I don't know whether we, need to rebuild this custom integration that our system integrator built us and now they own and they've been charging us for 15 years. We have no idea how it works. And we're like trapped in a relationship with them and we hate them, right? So that is abusive in that relationship. And so that needs to be something that they either break. Hopefully it's not a critical function, but a lot of times it is. That's why they haven't done it before. And we absolutely need to understand what that looks like. So I'm going to get to these questions. First, I'm going to go through the unhealthy integration model before we kind of dive in, right? So when we look at, and I think a big thesis to a healthy model before I switch gears is can you change a tool without breaking the entire system or breaking the entire business, right? Like that's kind of what we need to look at. Can we swap things in and out? That's innovation, right? Innovation gets to this, weird term about we're launching rockets into space and does everyone, have this growth mindset and that a bunch of that bullshit, right? But really what we're looking at is can we be fast and flexible as a business to meet the demands of our people and our customers? So unhealthy is absolutely those point-to-point integrations, right? And those are everywhere, right? We might have one or two, but they are everywhere. So we've got this point to this point, and then we don't have any other points that are involved in that type of model. That can be dangerous. When the vendor owns the logic, that's going to be huge. And they made the mappings so that they made their profitable or their ideal solution architecture from your business. You gave the keys away to your business to another person. No documentation. And this is when we go back to our hard things. Discipline, right? Discipline is documentation. That is good, healthy businesses document all the time. Is it annoying? Sometimes. Should you get in a mindset where that's important for you to just do? Absolutely. With these types of integrations, we're like holding on on bated breath that we don't know when they're going to break. And your team is just stressed because they're constantly like watching this thing like a hawk. Any change is a huge risk to you, right? Any change of your tools, swapping them in and out, huge risk to you. And then it has this like, if it works, don't touch it energy, right? Stu made that 25 years ago. I have no idea what that code says or where it is, but it works today. I'm not going to touch it so that it doesn't break. And this is like teams that are held hostage by their technology, not that utilize their technology as an actual strategy. That's when we have an unhealthy integration model. So let me get to these questions here. Thank you for putting them in here. I've just developed a business SaaS system to help integrate AI into their operations. Cool. Good for you. That sounds very interesting. So here where I work, we provide a SaaS, and later on we sustain the clients for change requests. I think I know where you work, right? And those change requests are usually, again, the profitable piece of that. If you look at any big example of these larger, more high profile failures, you're going to see these contracts started with IBM at 5 million and all of a sudden they're up to 300 million. Why in the world would IBM do it well the first time? Just out of the goodness of their hearts, when they're going to increase their contract size by like 3,000%, right? let's see. I'm not sure the big GSIs use SAP for payroll while they position Workday. I'm sure they maybe they do, right? While they position Workday and Oracle to clients. Who do they actually pay their people? No, I kid. I kid. I see the increasing problems with billion parties for estimating a quote and documenting. Let's see. And overall losing time with preparation of the SOW after discovery. And it really, I think that means pisses me off. So this is the best comment. I think when we look at the sales team selling versus the delivery teams then having to figure out the delivery. Sales teams sell, they'll figure it out. Again, like the contractor example I gave you with one of my clients where they're trying to sell this and the client savvily, because they have us, right, are saying, hey, we need to talk to your delivery team. And they're like, oh, damn, we're going to have to actually go find someone that can deliver this. They bring this person on. Oh, yeah, we have a great team atmosphere. They're going to do great. This contractor's never worked with this big system integrator before. But does that mean it's going to be terrible? No, but it certainly isn't going to be a cohesive team, because how would they know that? They've never done a project together before, right? So let's see. Needs to be modular. Depends, right? Depends on who. I wouldn't say modular ERP is a great choice. I would say modular microservices, open source ERP, open source anything is another integration to manage, right? That's how you see it. It's not a silver bullet for your business, right? IBM uses Workday. Thank you, Dean. That's fascinating. But yeah, I mean, I think that understanding of why they're selling you a system and what they get out of it, even if it's not like the bigger consultancies or anything like that, is really what you need to understand. Like, what compensation model are they given for selling you the system? And that's going to be a big thing, especially for S4HANA, since they've been so aggressive with it, going in with, pulling out the deadline on ECC and then launching RISE and then being like, hey, all of these bigger integrators, now they're compensated a lot on go lives. And that's becoming an issue, right? We have a client that's like, we need to go live in 6 months. And you're like, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you can turn it on in 2 months if you want to. It's certainly not going to be functional. Yeah, like you can run a marathon in 2 weeks if you want to. Not sure if you're going to make it across the finish line alive, but good luck to you. It doesn't mean you cannot do it. It means now they want to be more focused on being live on these systems, even if they do it poorly. Like it doesn't matter the quality of the system. It matters how fast you get there. And a lot of times your executives are bonused on go lives as well. So a lot of times your consultants are bonused on go lives. And that's just kind of how the system works. All right. Sales sells the customer the Rolls-Royce product. Delivery team gets a Honda budget. Yeah, I think Honda is a nice way to say it, right? Especially with those bigger consultancies. They may have the name brand, but just remember that you are not Target. Maybe you are, right? I mean, ask Target how their S4HANA launch went in Canada. Not well, right? I was speaking at a conference the other day, and one of the questions I got was, why isn't there Target in Canada? Is it because of SAP? I'm like, well, I'm not going to say it's not because of SAP, but I think those pieces are really critical to being understood in the sales process. Who's my delivery team? They may be like, well, we don't assign resources until the contract's signed. That's fair. But they have a head of delivery, right? They have someone who you can talk to about their approach, right? What's my escalation path? What if I need you today, right? We had a client that went live on S4HANA and EY was nowhere to be found. Their entire payroll, again, crashed. EY, absolutely nowhere to be found. Those people you need to be able to get a hold of them, and they need to be local, right? They need to be onshore employees that are available to you at any point. And I can't believe, no one was there for their go live. That's just crazy work in general. And so what time did I start this live, you guys? Let's see. I can never tell because I just have so much fun talking to you. I'm like, do I have 5 minutes left or do I have 35? Unfortunately, I only have 5, and then I have to go back to my day job. But this has been such a good conversation. And so in those 30-day live post support contracts, they absolutely have those, but I think they're not defined enough, right? A lot of times that's just the name of the agreement, but it's not defined like you will be here during the go live. You will be, all of these different things. We will have, a meeting every day, a scrum every day to go through blah, 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 blah. And that's just not something that we see, right? Those contracts are so ceremonial based. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of these companies get in trouble. We can look at the Zimmer Biomed example that I did a video on when it comes to Deloitte. Will they get their money back from Deloitte? It's hard to say because they signed an agreement that said, the business is responsible for this implementation, not Deloitte, right? And I have no idea if they'll get their money back, right? Deloitte made a motion to dismiss the case in November of 2025, and that's millions of dollars that they potentially lost because they signed an agreement that was quote unquote a standard agreement, and it didn't go into the specifics, or they didn't read the specifics, or they aren't, in the software business, so they're not really focused on what sort of pitfalls could be in these documents. But those things are going to be the Bible, especially when you go on to litigation, which hopefully never happens to you, right? But when it does, that's when it got real ugly, especially in the private sector like Zimmer, because they've already tried to negotiate that, right? Their lawyers have already tried mediation. And typically in those really bad ones, then you get slapped with an NDA. You get okay, I'll give you your money back if you just never talk about this again. And that's why I have this channel, right? That's why it's so important to talk about these types of things so that they can be held accountable for their actions, right? Agreements are negotiable. They are always negotiable, right? That is telling you who you're working with if you have someone whose contract is not negotiable. What business relationship do you know where nobody will negotiate contract terms? Nobody. That's wild, right? That's one thing IBM probably does well. I've always been on site for their go lives. I mean, that is important. It's critically important. And I think a lot of times COVID kind of changed that, right? We work in this virtual type of area where I can talk to you guys on the internet, but when it comes to go live, you need someone in the room with you, and hopefully you've stress test the scenarios to the point where you already understand what will happen if it breaks. Like, what are we going to do? But a lot of times we get in these pressure scenarios where we've missed the target go live. People are obsessed with the go live date, which really honestly is just a made up date until you get into testing. You have no idea until you're actually in that testing phase and you're able to really see, all right, what is this path forward, or what are my critical errors? Like, all of these different things. Offshore testing, right? Like if you need to cut costs on that, does this button go to this page, right? Maybe, but those are the types of things that you can offshore, not project management, not strategic pieces, and certainly not someone being in the room with you during go live. So if it comes up, you can't pay your people, then you don't have, like the Queensland Health example. There were some people that told me personally, right? They had gotten paid over, and then all of a sudden they weren't paid again for 3 weeks, so they could settle that up. And that's just wild to me that a company, right, that overpaid you, their fault, would then not pay you for weeks at end because they paid you too much. That is so messed up, and I can't imagine what people went through during that because of lazy work on the part of IBM and on the part of Queensland Health, because ultimately it was their responsibility, it was their project, their people, right? So with that, thank you so much for joining the live today. I'm so excited you guys are here. We do lives on LinkedIn If any one of you want to go over to I Know Cringy LinkedIn, tomorrow morning we are talking about, I honestly can't remember what we're talking about in the morning. If any of my moderators know, just tell me. But that's a great opportunity for you to hear from more of our team, not just me, to ask additional questions. If you follow me on LinkedIn, it's Kyler Cheatham, and you can head over there and talk to us on Fridays. That said, I do lives every Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes they move around. If you have a topic that you want me to talk about, definitely DM me. If you have additional questions, always DM me about certain systems and things like that. But thank you so much for all of the great questions today. This is really a point, is to have just a conversation. Oh, tomorrow's topic is IT maturity, which is a great one around solution architecture. And then specifically the agile question. How do you ensure that you understand how to build an IT team around a release schedule, release management, all of those different things. So, all right, my friends. Well, I will see you tomorrow. I hope